Hello everybody. Welcome to What I Learned This Week Live. What I learned this week live. Quick reminder, this will be uploaded to my podcast feed. So as soon as I start recording and then I stop recording, you can listen to that anytime if you subscribe to the podcast, which is searching out Spaniard on iTunes or whatever podcast app you use. It's there. It will be there. Give me a second to get satiated. Give you a second to get here. And then we'll rock and roll. Justin Greskowitz, did I just see you? All right, let's rock and roll. Justin Greskowitz. Hey, buddy. I might have just seen you on my Facebook page because I said, Justin Greskowitz, did I just see you? And then you signed on here, or I just knew, I just felt. I bet you're going to say, yo. I guess there's like a 1.5 second delay. What's up for the weekend, Justin? What are you doing? You fighting anytime soon? You fighting anybody? Anybody gonna feel the wrath of the purple people eater? Yeah? All right. 11-2, good deal, dude. That's very cool. Congrats. Will that be televised? Do they televise live? Will you be televised? That'll be fun. Good for you, dude. All right, let's go. Let's record. Justin, maybe this can give you some psychological warfare that you can use in your fight. I will check him out. Sam Bark. Speaking of bark, that made me think of a tree. Ah, cool. But bark made me think of a tree, which made me think of the machete I just bought. I just bought a machete. Because I had to clear some weeds. They're like really wimpy weeds to buy a machete, but I needed a reason to buy a machete, so I bought one. All right, let's rock and roll. 1, 2, 3, go. Hello, my friends, and happy weekend. Welcome to the Spaniard Show. Welcome to another edition of What I Learned This Week. In these episodes, so I put out a lot of content on my podcast. The best way I can liken it is to a channel, ESPN. ESPN has a bunch of different shows with different formats. That's what it is. The Spaniard Show is the channel. The different formats are What I Learned This Week. The nice voice crack there. AM Excellence, which is brought to you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. We have AMXKids, in which I read kids' books and extract the life lessons from that. And we also have interviews and conversations. And every once in a while, we have solo episodes. But that's kind of a quick listening guide, in-your-face listening guide. AMX is probably my favorite thing to do. AMX is where I read books, and then I extract the learning principles, and then I talk about the learning principles. I teach. If I'm the world's toughest lifelong learner, that's not enough. I got to teach this stuff. So if you're into books, if you're into learning, if you're into lifelong learning, you'll absolutely love AMX. It is Monday through Friday, 8 minutes. Some people tell me they don't have, well, I don't have 8 minutes. You do have 8 minutes. My alarm goes off at 5:10 in the morning. And then I walk to the bathroom. And then by the time I sit down on the couch to give myself like an 8-minute pep talk to go work out, that's like 8 minutes where you can listen, or you go to the bathroom, where they do a number 1 or number 2 in the morning. It takes time, brushing your teeth, boom, just hit play. Walking downstairs, getting your breakfast ready, you do have the time. You got to make it a priority. Let's segue that one into this week's content, what I learned this week. So I'm going to talk about 7 bullet points from the books, the podcast, the interviews, the conversations that I've had this week that I'm going to bring to you. And I'm going to throw a little extra juice in there, because I went to the Spartan World Championships in Lake Tahoe last weekend. Incredible environment, incredible event, great people. I ran the Beast, which was 13.5 miles and 30 obstacles. I was pretty happy with my time, but overall the experience was awesome. I'm going to be releasing a solo-sode in which I talk about that whole experience, break it down for you, as well as the fact that I got 6 incredible podcast guests that will be coming to the show in the near future. Let's jump in. So I cap off Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. Now this book was a pleasant surprise. I heard it was a really good book, but truthfully, I know nothing knew nothing about astrophysics. Who does know anything about astrophysics except scientists? The average person probably doesn't, but I feel like this book was written for the average person. And it was a it was a pleasure to read, and it was fun to read, and it has heightened my perspective. That's one of my favorite parts of reading is just perspective. It puts me in my place. It lets me know what's what. And one of the cool things towards the end of the book that Neil deGrasse Tyson gets into, he gets into a lot of philosophy towards the end of the book relating us, our purpose, our lives to astrophysics. And one of the things he says is this: ignorance is the natural state of mind for a research scientist. So ignorance is the natural state of mind for a research scientist. People who believe they are ignorant of nothing have neither looked for nor stumbled upon the boundary between what is known and unknown in the universe. So he's telling us from his perspective, from a scientist's perspective, ignorance is the natural state of mind, meaning they don't know. They don't know. They know that they don't know. And he goes on to say, people who believe they are ignorant of nothing have neither looked for nor stumbled upon the boundary between what is known and unknown in the universe. You know those people. You know those people who believe they're ignorant of nothing. You know those people who think they know it, who think they know it all. And he's telling us that they've obviously never looked for, they've never stumbled upon, they've never studied the universe, because then they would know, hey, you don't know. You are ignorant of certain things. Maybe you're ignorant of many things. So I processed this and digested it, and I got to thinking, you think you know, but you have no idea. You've heard that over and over. You think you know, but you have no idea. Kind of like what it's fighting. I know my former coach is watching right now. It's laughable. People think they know what it's like to be in a fight. People think they know that how easy, what you should do. This boy, he's terrible. He's so stupid. Just get up. F him up. F him up. That was my favorite chant, favorite call out when I'd be fighting. F him up, Chuck. So it's not that easy. There's a reason we're not effing them up, because it's really hard to do. But then think about this. When you learn more, you'll know less. When you learn more, you'll know less. So what do I mean by that? This journey of lifelong learning that officially started a few years ago, it has opened my eyeballs up to the world. And reading this book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, further complements that. Learning that there are billions of planets and billions of galaxies and billions of stars in the billions of galaxies, and dinosaurs being extinct 65 million years ago, but the Big Bang being 14 billion years ago. What? It's mind-blowing. It's mind-expanding. It's out of this world, out of this universe is the stats and the facts, the data that we're talking. But when you learn more, you'll know less. And that scares a lot of people. But for me, it's like, no, I like that idea. I like the fact of never fully knowing, because once you know, rather once you think you know, then it's kind of over. What fun is that? If you take on this attitude or this lifelong learning journey, it's never over. You'll continually learn. You'll continually blow your mind. You'll continually learn and then new and then try things. Learn things. Learn new things and then try new things is what I'm trying to get at there. But don't fret that you don't know it. Just keep learning and keep learning and keep learning. You don't even have to know what you don't know, because you'll be so busy stinking learning. This was another neat thing. I heard deGrasse Tyson talk about this on at least one podcast, or I read it, I think I heard him say it on a podcast. But there's this idea, and there's the contrarian point of view that says, well, why? Why? It doesn't matter. We're right here. I'm comfortable doing this. And there are many people who don't share in this mindset of lifelong learning and don't have an interest for it and are very comfortable with what they know. I'm not. I like to learn. I like to be challenged. I like to be challenged and then maybe even change directions or solidify how I do feel. So I heard that posed to him one time, and he says, why, and this is paraphrased, why be curious He goes on to say that if cavemen wouldn't have been curious, we'd still be living in a cage. Or in a cage. This tells you where my mind. In a cave. So if cavemen wouldn't have been curious, we'd still be living in a cave. The question is, why not be curious? If you like your comfortability, that's cool. Get it. I know. Sometimes I just want to shut my brain off and be comfortable. But that little seed, that little fire in me of learning, of continual learning, will never go away. And if the cavemen wouldn't have been curious, guess what? I wouldn't be live streaming and you wouldn't be taking this in via podcast. We'd probably be cold. We'd probably be sleeping on rocks in the ground and not soft pillows and not down comforters. And my puppy wouldn't be right there laying on a comfy rug. That's why we should be curious, my friends. Moving on to Tuesday's episode, AMXKids. Remember, AMX, which stands for AM Excellence, which is the show is designed to help you start your day off on the right foot. It's 8 minutes of information and entertainment and inspiration. There you go, based on the books I read. AMXKids, where new episodes are released every Tuesday, is that, except kids books. Except I'm reading kids books, and I'm currently reading The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, and I'm smiling because this is a classic. It's been, this and Where the Red Fern Grows have been probably suggested the most when I put out, hey, what book should I read for AMXKids? If you, listener, have any suggestions, please reach out to me at Charlie Spaniard on social media and tell me what middle school age book I should read and then discuss on the show. But in this week's episodes, and I'm talking to you parents and coaches and teachers and mentors, because I feel like a lot of us, that's who's listening right now, and it's up to us to bring these shows to your kids. And in this week's episode, Ponyboy and Johnny find themselves in some serious trouble. And based on that situation, we're talking the importance of choices and planning. So this episode, this week's AMXKids, is all about choices and planning. How do you avoid putting yourself in a situation in which you shouldn't be? Or if you are in that situation, how do you get out of that situation? So that is the focus of AMXKids. Came out on Tuesday. New episode will be out on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Moving on to my next book. So I just started this book on, I believe it was Wednesday. And you hear me talk about these guys as much as anyone. Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, who wrote Extreme Ownership, who have Echelon Front, which is a leadership consulting company. I've gotten to be friends and acquaintances with them and their company, and it's been extraordinary. And I read their last book, Extreme Ownership, and waiting for the dichotomy of leadership to come out. If you're a leader, an aspiring leader, you need to read this book, and you need to read Extreme Ownership. These guys have been there and done that. They know. Battle tested, real battle tested. Not kind of they took a course. No, they were there. They were in Ramadi. They risked their lives. They lost comrades in battle. They know leadership. And what they've done is they've transitioned this into everyday life, work, personal, everyday life. Quote from the book, the foremost requirement for potent leadership is, before I say this, the foremost requirement for potent leadership is boom. I've said this a long time ago. I heard Jocko say it on a podcast. I say it often. It's one of the most fascinating things, balancing this thing with ego. The most foremost requirement for potent leadership is humility. Humility. Balancing ego and humility is one of my favorite dichotomies that exists. The dichotomy of leadership takes all of these dichotomies, basically these contrasts or these opposites, and it explains how and why we need to balance them in our leadership style. But think of that. If the foremost requirement for potent leadership is humility, then guess what? That puts a burden on all of us. Why? Because we can all be humble. Okay, well, if we can all be humble, then kinda I think that we can all be leaders. And when you put it that way, if you're not being humble and if you're not leading, it doesn't have to be a ginormous team, doesn't have to be a military team in the combat, but maybe it's your family, maybe it's your classroom, maybe it's if you're a teacher, maybe it's the faculty room, if you're the principal, it's your school. There are many different ways to lead. But if we remember that the foremost requirement for potent leadership is humility, rest easy. There's no pressure. All you got to do is be humble. That's it. I've been waiting a long, long time to dive into this book, so we'll be learning the many facets of leadership that must be balanced. Moving on, this is an awesome quote. So Jocko and Leif Babin are partners. They wrote Extreme Ownership. They wrote this book. They started Echelon Front, which is their leadership consulting company. And I've gotten to spend a fair amount of time with both of these guys. And I had a conversation with Leif behind the scenes in which I just thought, wow, this guy is the real deal. This is him. What he teaches is him. It's his fabric. It's his texture as a human being. In the book, he says this, quote, and this is in battle, in the middle of a mission. He says, quote, every bone in my body wanted to step up and take charge, bark a verbal command that could be heard over the sound of intense gunfire, but I wasn't in charge. He goes on to talk about the idea of just loving it, right? Being in that intense situation, the gunfire, the chaos, and smiling and just loving where he was at. That's intense, folks. That's hardcore. And if there's anyone from whom I want to learn leadership, it's that type of guy. So the dichotomy that exists here, so he wanted to jump up. He's been in charge, and he might have been in charge the next day or the previous day. But the dichotomy that exists here is the fact that every great leader is a follower. That we need to understand our roles at the appropriate times. Sitting right now behind the microphone, talking, teaching, etc., I'm the teacher. But when I go to Jocko and Leif's events, or when I go out to Spartan and I sit and I listen to Joe DeSena and the Spartan Up podcast team, learning from them, I'm the student. So it's up to us. And if you go back to Joe DeSena's The Spartan Way book, principle number 1 is self-awareness. So we all need to be self-aware of our roles and aware of the fact that those roles can change and act accordingly. It's not always time to be the leader. Sometimes you got to sit back, be humble, and be the follower. So my interview this week was with retired Command Sergeant Major Michelle Jones. So a few weeks ago, went up to West Point Military Academy, and I was able to sit in on a leadership and diversity conference. Rod Woodson, I got to sit down with Rod Woodson, who will be coming to the show soon. Rod Woodson, if you don't know Rod Woodson, Google him, look him up. And also retired Command Sergeant Major Michelle Jones. They both spoke at the conference. I was able to hear them speak, take notes, and then create an episode and a conversation off of those notes when we sat down after. She had many firsts as a female in life, as both an African-American female and as a military female. So she had all these firsts that she talks about during her talk and then in the episode as well. So this is her referring to that fact. She says, quote, you don't think about it. You're just doing it. Then someone tells you and you're like, nah, that's not true. And then you realize, oh my goodness, it really is. Okay, so what do you do with that position? I feel like that's a perfect, and I didn't plan it, I feel like that's a perfect follow-up to the previous point of knowing when you're a leader, knowing you're a follower, and then also understanding that humility is key in leadership. So she was just doing what she did. In the book 11 Rings by Phil Knight, by Phil Jackson, he talks about coaching the Bulls and the Lakers, and he says that it progressively gets harder and harder to win as you win more. Because the more you win, the more naturally you feel to not necessarily get complacent, but stop doing the little things that got you to the top. And it's that pull away from those little things that can distance you from winning and continuing to win. So it's doing those things that retired Command Sergeant Major Michelle Jones is telling us. You're just doing it. You don't think about it. It's so stinking crucial, again, going back to the idea of awareness, to understand, hey, these are the things that I'm doing or I've done to get me to this position. And regardless of the outcome from here on out, if I want to continue the ascension or I want to continue the path and the trajectory, I need to continue doing these things. And then what I really liked, so we connected on the fact that we were learners, but also teachers. So she gave an equation in her talk, but then, with knowledge and learning and et cetera, but then continued it into the idea of what good is it if you don't teach it? So sitting here, creating this idea of the world's toughest lifelong learner, it's not just about learning, it's about teaching. Like, what can I do with it? All of these things that I'm learning from this gold that is packed within the pages of these books. What can I do with it? She's saying, okay, yeah, I was the first female in these many significant roles, but what do I do with it? What am I going to do with it? And she is doing it. She's created a business. She continues to speak. She continues to lead and advise, etc. A very successful, powerful woman with a great message. I had the opportunity to sit down with her, and it was an absolute pleasure. Again, that's episode number 198 in this past week. Moving on, let's talk about the ultimate dichotomy. So there are these dichotomies, these yin and yangs that exist. So a dichotomy, it's not an exact dichotomy, but I get all the time, because people have a preconception about fighters. That one, they're supposed to look tough. Two, they're supposed to be kind of meathead guys who don't speak real well. And the fact that I read books, the fact that I'm a, quote, normal looking person, often catches people. It's kind of a dichotomy. Wait, you were a fighter, but you also love to read books and talk about learning? That's kind of a dichotomy. They don't go hand in hand. And that's the idea of a dichotomy, is these two kind of contrasting ideas that are balanced in the middle. So the ultimate dichotomy that Jocko tells us is essentially that the leader, and when I say leader, I could mean parent, I could mean teacher, I could mean coach, I could mean whomever, a person who is leading other people in any capacity. The ultimate dichotomy is that the leader must care about his or her followers as much as anything in the world, but also make decisions that could potentially hurt them. Now, I automatically started thinking of that from a parent perspective because I have kids. And there are decisions that I have to make, or decisions that my parents had made in the past that might hurt me, might make me cry, might hurt my heart, might whatever. I watch my son Rocky try to climb up stuff, get on chairs, and I want to help him. I want to make everything easy for him. But you can't, if you're making everything easy for the people below you, then you're not really teaching them, then you're not really guiding them effectively. It's not always easy, and sometimes you have to make decisions. He goes on to talk about it from a professional standpoint. If an employee's bringing down the team, you might have to get rid of them. If an athlete whom you're best friends with his or her parents and they're not holding up their end of the bargain and they're breaking all the rules, you can't just keep them hanging on because you think it's, well, I have to. No. You got to make the decisions that can hurt the people under your command and or the people close to them. There was another thing, in this same section of the book that I thought was really neat, and it drove home an idea to me. When you're sitting on something, a situation, maybe an event that's coming up or something you have to do, you're fretting doing, and you're contemplating it. You lose sleep, maybe you sweat over it, maybe you don't eat over it, maybe you ask, if you're like me, maybe you ask 100 different people what they think about the situation. And in the book, they were talking about this idea, and it had to do with military and assuming, positions and doing certain things. There was a quote that was said on a couple different pages. It said, there was no decision to make. There was no decision to make. So they were put into these situations that required a decision, okay? And they could create options to make that decision. But at the end of the day, they said there was no decision to make. They knew what they had to do. And I thought about that and reflected on that. It seems like in my life, and I'm guessing at least some of your lives out there are things that need to be done, and you need to do them. There's no decision to make. There's no, the pondering, and I'm speaking to me right now, the pondering, the meandering, the like contemplating, the sweating, the fretting, it's doing nothing. Because there's no decision to make. You need to do the thing. And I think taking this context, the context of that in this book really, really drove home that idea to me. There's another thing they talk about, the burden of command. So that's the burden of command, folks. You are who you are. You do what you do. You're in the situation in which you are in. That's the burden of command. As a professional fighter, there are things that go along with it. As a parent, there are things that go along with it. As a teacher, as a coach, as a whatever you are, there are things to go along with it. That's the burden of command. Professional fighting is a great example there. No, I'm not necessarily leading anybody, but the burden, let's call it the burden of the position. The burden of the position is that cage door is going to shut and you've got to fight another human being on television in an arena and you could get hurt. The burden of the position is that you could get seriously hurt and or you could potentially die. The burden of the position is that you could suffer brain trauma that will affect you later in life. You're going to get hate from public people whom you don't even know. There's all these burdens. So that idea, again, the burden of command and the fact there's no decision to make, those really spoke to me. And I hope they spoke to you as well. This has been what I learned this week. I love doing this stuff. I love learning. I love teaching. I hope you enjoy listening. Any ounce of support you'd like to show the show, know that it is sincerely appreciated, whether it's a review on iTunes, whether it's bringing old Spanny in to speak to your school, your group, your organization, whatever group you're leading, and you want to be infected. Here's the thing. What's my message? What's your message, Spaniard? My message is that of continually lifelong learning. That's my message. Bringing all of these books. I have 4 books beside me right now. Bringing all of this to your stage, to your classroom. That's what I do. You tell me what you want your folks to learn, and I teach it to them. From my experiences and the experiences of the hundreds and hundreds of books that I read, and the almost 100 conversations that I have on my shelf. This has been a pleasure. Thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to coming back next week with what I learned next week. See you Monday morning for AM Excellence. See ya. Oh, boy. Oh, boy. Okay, folks. So thanks for tuning in. Have a great weekend.